Welcome back to the Neo X console training. In this video, we're going to be talking about programming submasters and programming cues. So looking at both programming for kind of on the fly, concert kind of operation, and also very much pre-programmed, fully theatrical playback as well. So I've got a lighting state up here on one of my submasters. I'm going to pull that down. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a lighting state that we can then program onto one of my submasters. So using what we've learned so far with our fixture controls, I'm going to go and say that I want 1 through at 3 enter. That's going to set those fixtures to 30%. I'm going to go and grab 51 through and have them at full. Those are my upstage spots. I'm going to go to position and I'm going to go and grab control of those and tilt them out. I'm actually going to my fan settings and I'm going to just go and spread the pan of those a little bit. And I'll click close on that. And I'm going to go to beam. And I'm going to go and pop a gobo in there, something like that. Let's go to color. And I'm going to go and grab a color on those. So there we go, I'm happy with that lighting state. So once you've created what you want, we can then go ahead and tap the record button on the console. And then we can choose to record this onto one of our playback faders. I'm using the X15 here, so I've got 15 faders to play with. If you're on the X5, you have the 5 faders to play with. But on both consoles, you can page your faders, so you can access multiple pages if required. Now, in my case here, submaster number 14 is empty. So I'm going to go and tap sub 14's bump button. And that's now recorded my submaster there. Our lighting state is still on because we haven't told it to turn off yet. So I'm going to go ahead and tap the release key once. That's going to release the currently selected fixtures. Tap release again. That's going to get rid of any other manually programmed fixtures. And now I've done that, I can go ahead and raise my submaster there to output my lighting state. Now I've got that on stage, I can start to mix between all of my other various subs that I've got. So I can boost up the front light with a playback with a submaster I've already recorded. I can go and bring in some extra gobo breakups, and you can just mix for on-the-fly operation as needed. Now, something we can do is we can turn this submaster into a cue list. So we might decide that we want to go and record another cue onto this particular submaster fader, and that will then turn it into a cue list. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to make some changes. So I'm going to go and grab my 51 through. I'm going to dim those down. So I'm going to go and say at 4 enter to set them at 40%. I'm going to go and change the color of those. So I'm actually going to go and use my sidebar color controls here for that. And I'm also going to add in a little bit of top light as well. So I'm going to go and say 21 through full. That's quite a narrow angle, so I'm going to go and widen that out. So let's go to beam, and I'm going to go and zoom those. And I'm going to put them in a saturated color. So I'm actually going to go and open my color picker window here. So I've got a full screen window. And let's go and put them in a saturated color there. And once we created our lighting state, I'm going to tap record. And just like we did previously, I'm going to go and tap my submasters button. But this time we get a pop-up because the console's saying, well, there's something already on here. What do you want to do? So you can replace, so i.e. what was on there before, replace it and have this new lighting state on there. Or we've got a couple of options. We could convert this to a chase, or what we're going to do in this scenario is we're going to convert it to a cue list. So I'm going to go and say convert to cue list. And my display on the console now updates. We're no longer seeing a submaster, which is our yellow values. We're instead seeing that we have a cue list on my fader here instead. So we've now recorded a second cue onto our playback fader here, and that's automatically turned our submaster into a cue list. So there's multiple reasons why you might want to do that. For example, you might have a particular song on here, and you might have various different scenes within that song. And because it's a cue list, the button below our fader there has automatically become a go button, so that we can step through those various scenes within that song, for example. But that can all be configured. And if we want to configure a particular playback on the console, we can just go and tap on the touchscreen, and this opens the settings window. So we can go in here and we can change the name of that particular playback so that we can start to mix on the fly and we'll know what does what. And then we can configure all of the various buttons that we've got available to us. And as well as that, we've also got our encoder. So with our particular playback encoder, so we've got an encoder for every single one of our playback faders. Within there, we've got various options. So we've got things like the ability to go in and set that as affect speed, or we've got things like cue executor or inhibit. So if I come out of that one and we actually go and use this sub that I've got programmed here, the encoder in this case is actually allowing me to change the hue of that playback on the fly, for example. I'll just go and release that, and that will go back to the programmed color within that playback. So within here, we can go and change the buttons, but the button at the bottom there is our go button, allowing us to step through those. And the button above that is our back button as well. Now, if we want to start to work on this cue list in a more theatrical way, we can actually go and move over to using the theatrical playback tools, such as our master playback here and the sidebar, rather than working on a fader here. So for that, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to go and do a Neo release. Neo release, that's a very handy shortcut just to release everything, release all control. What I'm going to do now is on my console here in the sidebar, I'm going to go and assign this stack, this playback here that is currently on this fader, I'm going to go and assign that onto my main cue stack control. So to do that, I can use my drop down here on my cue sidebar, and we can see here now we've got auto cue list. That's just the name it's been given. We haven't given it a name yet, so it's just the auto cue list that we had on 14. So I'm going to go and choose that. And we can now see that we've got a couple of cues in there now, because we can see that we've got our first cue and then our second cue as well in there. And so we've now got our two cues on our master playback stack there, and we can start to build on this. So let's go and create a third cue on our playback here. So for my next example, let's go and take down our kind of back gobo breakup. So I'm going to go and say 51 through out. And then I'm going to go and grab control of those top lights, which are 21 through. So I'm going to go and say 21 through, enter on those. And let's go to edge, and I'm just going to bring the diffusion out on those for my top light. Now I've got that how I want it, so I can go and record that. Now we can start to use our theatrical record tools. So to record Q3, I can go and type in record Q3, enter. And that's going to record that current lighting state as cue number 3 on our currently selected cue list. And as we said, we're working on cue list 14 here. I've recorded the cue and we are now in that cue. So we recorded the cue and we're now in Q3 at the moment. Now, another way of recording our cues, we can use a record shortcut. So this time, let's make another change. I might want to go and bring in our truss lights at the back. We could be for set lighting or something like that. So I'm going to go and say 11 through 14 full. And let's go and pop them in a color as well. Something like that, just to give a bit of a lift. I am actually going to go and zoom those as well. And once I've created what I want, I'm now going to record that. But rather than saying record cue number enter, we can actually use the syntax record record. And record record will automatically record the next available cue on that particular cue stack that we're working on. And so we're now in Q4. Now, I might decide I need to make a change. I need to update an existing cue. So what I'm going to go and say is I'm going to say go to Q3, enter. And that's going to take us into Q3 there. And I need to make a change. That top light is far too bright. So what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to go and say 21 through, enter. And I can see there that they're currently at full. I might actually go and use my intensity wheel now just to bring that down. I'm much happier with that. So I now want to store those changes to that cue. So what I can do to update the current queue that I'm in is I can simply say update. And now if I want to, I can go ahead and tap my tracking button. And my tracking button, that will automatically populate the queue number. So it knows that we're currently in Q3. So tapping my tracking button has automatically populated Q3 on my command line. If I wanted to be very specific on what queue we were updating, I could of course use the syntax update Q3 and then press my tracking button. Now, each press of my tracking button will cycle me through my various tracking options. And in my case here, I actually do want this to be a queue only update. So I'm going to say update queue only, enter. And there we go. That's saved those changes. We're now in Q3 and we can see these changes have taken effect. And I can now press my go button and we then go into Q4, which looks exactly how we had it. What else can we do? Well, some of these queues, I have no idea what they are. I haven't named them yet, so I might want to do that. So if I want to name a queue, I could use the syntax Q4 text. And as soon as I do that, I can then type in a name on my keyboard. So I'm going to pull out my keyboard tray. Hit enter, and as soon as I enter on that name, that will then populate that queue name for me. Now, what we can also do is start to customize our fixture timings. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back a queue, so I can use my Q- button just to go to the previous queue. And if I go into my next queue, we're currently running over the default fade time of 3 seconds, but I might want to change that. I might want to say, oh, actually, this needs to be a much more gradual time. I want it to be more like 10 seconds. So for that, what I can say is I can say Q4 time 10 enter. And that will update the fade time for Q4. So I'm going to go back up a queue, Q-, and press my go button. And we then get our much more gradual fade time of 10 seconds. So I can use that time syntax for that. Now, with timings, we can actually start to really drill down. We've got a queue time active there. Everything about that queue, intensities, color, position, it's all taking 10 seconds. But we can actually drill down further. Because if I tap my time button, each tap of time, you'll notice, updates my command line to allow me to adjust the time of different things. We'll then wrap back to the beginning. So I'll just show that again. If I press my time key, if I say time 10, that will be setting the fade time. Press time again, and I then can define the downtime. So I could go and say that I want a downtime of 5. Press time again, that will then bring position onto the command line, so I can then set time for position. Another tap of time, that's color. So in my case here, I could go and put a color time in there of 1 second, for example. And once I've set all of that, I can hit enter, and that will update the timing for that particular queue for me. I do get a little tag on that queue in the queues window. I've got a little AFT. That is indicating that I've got attribute family timing, i.e., color, position, edge, they may be running at different times to the rest of the queue. So I get that bit of feedback for me. We can drill down even further than that. If I want some fixtures to have their own timing separate to the other fixtures in the queue, what I could do is set time per fixture. So in my case here, we have, let's go back a queue, fixtures 11 through 14, when I press go, they are coming on from 0. And I might decide, well, I want those to be on much quicker than my fixtures that are fading down. So I'm actually going to go into Q3. I'm just going to Q- to go into that queue. And I'm going to go and say 11 through 14, enter to select those. And I'm going to go and say time to enter. And I've now got FT displayed for those particular fixtures, meaning fixture timing. There are timing values associated to those fixtures. If I want to view that timing information, hold Neo and tap live, and that will take us into our timing view rather than intensities, so I can view all of my timing. I'm just going to go and hit live to go back to my normal intensity view. And when I've made those changes, I can then update the queue with those changes. In my case, I'm just going to do an update. And that updates the current queue with the default tracking settings, and that saved those changes. So now when I press my go button, we can go into that queue, and this time those fixtures will be able to use those previous timings. So if we go into Q2 and we go into Q3, those timings will be associated. So we've looked at timing there, both queue level, attribute level, and fixture level. All of that logic applies to delay as well. So in my Q4 here, I've got fixtures 11 through 14 coming up. But I might want to actually delay fixtures 11 through 14 coming up a little bit first. So what I'm going to go and do is say 11 through 14, enter. And I'm going to go and say a delay of 2, enter. And again, that is fixture timing. Go to Neo Live. I can see now that we've got delay timings present for those fixtures. Go back to Live, and I'm going to go and save those changes. So I'm going to go and do an update again. And this time, I'll do a Q minus to go into the previous queue. Go into my next queue. Those fixtures are delayed, and then they begin their timings. So that's how we can use delay. And of course, we can do a delay at queue level as well. I could just simply say Q4 delay, and then add a number in. So we've looked at times and delays, but what we can also do is follow. So we can start to automate our queue lists so that certain queues follow on from one another. So in this example here, I've got my queues here, and I might decide, right, well, this queue here, I just want it to follow on from the previous queue. So essentially, if I go back a queue into Q2 here, I want this lighting state to run, and then I want my Q3 to follow on afterwards. So I can add a follow to Q2. So if I add a follow to Q2, that is telling the console that the next queue needs to follow on automatically afterwards. So what I can do is I can go and say Q2 follow, and if I want to, I could then set a time as well. So I could say Q2 follow 5 enter, for example. And what we see is that we get a follow added to Q2. We can now see its timing information and its follow information. And not only that, we now also get a little tag on Q3. That's just telling you that Q3 will be automatically following on from the previous queue. So if I go to Q1, there's our Q1. I'm going to press my go button. We fade into Q2. Once our fade time is completed, the remain of the follow counts down, and then we go into our Q3. So what we're seeing there is a follow, so that when we press our go button to go into Q2, the console is then counting down, and then we can go into Q3. If I go and do a Q2 follow enter, that will remove that follow for me so that we can get rid of that automatic follow. Now, what we might also want to be able to program are part queues. So as well as recording whole queues, we might want to start to break things down, have different parts of the queue controlling different fixtures in our rig, for example. Now, on the console, I don't have a physical part key, but if I do want to access part for kind of theatrical playback, I can go and tap my user key. And within the user key, within the keys tab, I've got various different extra functions that we can configure to that key, and so I could go and choose part and click OK on that. So what I can do now is if I go into Q4, the fade times are running through for Q4, and I might decide, right, well, for this particular queue, I want to assign certain fixtures to a part. So I could say, right, fixtures 11 through 14, I want them to be in part 1 for this particular queue. So I could go 11 through 14, enter, and I could then go and say part 1, enter, using my part key. And I just get a little 1 displayed at the top of my classic view there, just to let me know that those fixtures have been assigned a part. And then to save that information in, I can simply do a update. And that will then add that part information in. And we can see in the queues window here, we get that part row displayed. So that is our programming queues. We've looked at updating, and we've also looked at timing. Of course, another really important aspect is deleting queues as well. If I want to get rid of Q3, I can just simply use the syntax delete Q3, enter. Console's then going to give me a pop-up, which is really useful. If I click OK, that will be deleting that queue, but it will be deleting with tracking. So that might be something that could then cause subsequent queues to look different. So what you can do here is also choose to go and delete queue only, so you know that you're going to remove that queue and all of your subsequent cues will look how you program them. So in that case, I am going to say, yep, I do want to proceed, but I want to proceed cue only, and now Q3 is removed. So we've been working a lot in the sidebar here on the console, but if I want to drill down and have much more information in front of me, I can go and use my buttons at the bottom here and go and open this in my full screen cue list window. You've got all of your various cue lists on the left, and as we can see, I've got my current cue list selected, and we can see this in kind of spreadsheet form, the various rows of each of our cues. And if we want to, we can start to interact with this window in more of a spreadsheet style. We can name cues from in here as well if required. A couple of nice things in here. We can add notes to every single cue. So you can go to the Notes tab and start to just type in text strings with your keyboard. Worth mentioning as well that you can actually, once you've typed in notes, you can actually get the console to play your notes back for you. So you can plug in some headphones, for example, and just listen to your notes. So you can be looking at the stage, programming away whilst the console reads your notes to you, so you can make changes. So as well as the notes, being able to add notes to a cue, what we can also do is add a path to a cue. So to do that, we can go to the Paths tab. Now within the Paths tab, we've got the ability to add a movement path or a color path. And what that basically means is when we press go to go into this cue, how do our lights get there? So rather than just doing a complete crossfade, observing the cue's fade time, we could actually have them go via a certain point on stage if it's moving lights. Or equally, we could have those lights fading through a certain hue, for example. So you can use the add movement or add color path buttons to do that. If I go and say create color path, I can tell the console which lights I want to use. I can go and say 1 through 6, enter, and that then accesses the path editor that we can then use to go in and define how we want these fixtures to crossfade into the cue. I'm going to go and click close on that one though, and I'll go back to live to come out of that window. So that is our programming. So we've looked at programming onto our playback phase, programming subs onto playbacks. We've seen how we can then convert them to cue lists for more theatrical playback as well. And we've then looked at some cue timing information, updating and deleting as well. There's far more information available in the videos, both on the console and on our YouTube channel. So do go and check those out for more information.